Hello everyone, welcome to Cinema Magic. Be sure to hit that like button and subscribe button as we recap the 2024 American romantic comedy movie titled Shallow Hal, directed by the Farrelly brothers, starring Gwyneth Paltrow and Jack Black. Hal conversed with his dying father when he was younger, and his father advised him never to settle for mediocrity at the beginning of this film. Hal's father also advised him to get a stunning woman with a fantastic figure, and the man passed away shortly after. Hal, therefore, vowed to make his father proud. Hal is currently solely interested in attractive ladies. Hal spends his time with his friend Mauricio as he struggles to find the right woman for him. As they head to the pub to have some beer and catch up on life, Mauricio announces that he's breaking up with Lindy, his stunning girlfriend. Hal is taken aback when Mauricio expresses his dislike for Lindy's long legs. Hal, in the meantime, announces that he and Jill, his neighbor, are finally going out. When Hal encounters Jill on her way home, she declines his invitation to grab a drink. Hal doesn't mind when Jill tells him she's not attracted to him. In fact, he tries to convince her to stay with him for 5 days due to his impending promotion. Sadly, Jill declines him and finally walks away. Hal is dismayed when he doesn't receive the promotion the next day. His co-workers, Artie and Jen, attempt to console him. Hal, though, claims that Jill's breakup has made him feel worse. Then, Artie draws attention to Hal's weakness, selecting women purely based on their appearance. Jen, however, claims that Hal constantly pursues women who are well above his level. Moments later, Hal meets Tony Robbins in the elevator. The guy is a famous TV guru, and Hal can't believe his luck. Hal asks him what he's doing in town, but as Tony speaks, the elevator suddenly stops. Then, they spend hours stuck inside the elevator, so Hal takes that opportunity to share how Jill dumped him. Hal explains that he's kind of picky, describing his ideal woman to Tony. Unfortunately, Tony thinks he's a bit shallow in how he looks at women. When he asks Hal about his parents, he replies that he doesn't remember his father. Hal says his father died when he was 9, which confuses Tony because he is already old enough to remember a lot. Hal also discloses that his mother believes he may have experienced trauma, and Tony's only role is to provide comfort. However, Tony tells Hal he's a bit fixated on people's appearance. Then Tony says, from that moment on, Hal will only see what's inside a person whenever he meets someone in the future. Tony also adds that it's a special arrangement between them, but Hal doesn't take him seriously. After that, Tony asks Hal to close his eyes and imagine he's on a beach, looking into a woman's eyes and seeing her soul. While doing this, Tony continues to help Hal relax, and it isn't long before Hal leaves the office. After work, Hal shares a cab with a lady, Katrina, believing she looks beautiful. The woman notices that Hal won't stop staring at her, and when Hal says she's beautiful, the driver can't believe what he's hearing. Hal also thinks Katrina is a model, causing the lady to laugh hysterically. Eventually, they reach the east side, where Hal asks Katrina to hang out with him if she's free. Of course, Katrina is surprised that Hal wants to see her again, so she makes sure they'll keep in touch by getting the guy's number. That night, Hal calls Mauricio and informs him they're going out. In a bar, he shares with Mauricio the details of his therapy session with Tony in the elevator, emphasizing how it immediately improved his relationship with women. Then, a guy named Walt approaches them, and it's obvious that Mauricio doesn't like him. Annoyed, Mauricio goes to the restroom while Walt buys drinks for Hal, and Walt says he's now retired. He also soon leaves with a woman, and that's when Hal notices Bella. Hal asks Bella to dance, and the two have fun on the dance floor with the girl's friends. Meanwhile, Mauricio notices Hal dancing with 3 ladies, who turn out to be unattractive. Naturally, Mauricio tries to get Hal out of that awkward situation and says they should go home, but Hal isn't sure why he's acting that way, so Hal ignores his friend and continues dancing with the women. And when Jill shows up, she can't believe Hal is already over her. The next day, Hal finds a lovely lady on the street and follows her to a store. Unaware she's bigger than him, Hal approaches the woman, Rosemary, and tries to crack a joke, but she only gets offended. As a result, Hal quickly apologizes to Rosemary and expresses his desire to make amends. Shortly after, they head to a pizza cafe. Hal discovers that Rosemary is volunteering at the hospital as she awaits her re-enlistment in the Peace Corps. Then, Hal gets impressed when Rosemary orders a lot of food, so he does the same thing, making the lady smile. Hal also keeps complimenting Rosemary, causing her to think he's making fun of her. Unfortunately, Hal remains clueless, but he immediately helps Rosemary when her chair breaks. As they leave, two guys mock Rosemary, forcing Hal to follow them inside and call them out. Hal thinks they're making fun of his weight, but he doesn't care about that because he believes he's hit the jackpot by being with Rosemary. However, the men simply laugh at him, becoming confused when Hal persists in boasting about his date. Afterward, Hal asks for Rosemary's number and learns that she's the daughter of his boss, Steve Shanahan. A few days later, Hal tells Mauricio about Rosemary and says he's nervous to see her again. Lindy shows up and invites Mauricio to the Beatles' reunion, but he declines after seeing her toes. Once Lindy's gone, Hal notices Rosemary's arrival and immediately greets her, leaving Mauricio shocked. Mauricio then leaves to give Hal and Rosemary some time to themselves, and the two talk about the things they like. Rosemary also takes Hal to the hospital, where she introduces him to her patients, one of whom is a little girl named Cadence. However, a strict nurse named Nurse Peeler interrupts their visit. Despite this interruption, Rosemary disregards it, and once the nurse leaves, she gets ready to engage in a playful kissing game with the children. After that, Rosemary praises Hal for being helpful with the children and says people usually get squeamish in that situation. Then, when they reach Hal's apartment building, Hal introduces Jill and Rosemary to each other. Jill shakes Rosemary's hand and quickly leaves, and when Hal invites his date to his place, she politely refuses. Rosemary expresses her unfamiliarity with the situation and acknowledges that she has recently been in a relationship, but their relationship didn't work out. Rosemary also remembers how Mauricio looked at her, but Hal tells her to ignore the guy. At the same time, Rosemary asks Hal to stop telling her she's lovely and not fat, saying it makes her uncomfortable. Of course, that confuses Hal, and he says it's silly of Rosemary to think she's not beautiful. Sadly, Rosemary only gets upset and walks away. The following day, Hal shares with Mauricio how sad he is about Rosemary and says her self-image is so far off. However, Hal is taken aback when Rosemary unexpectedly appears and apologizes to him. However, he doesn't seem to care about the past and simply gives her a kiss. They then go to a public pool for a date, where Rosemary makes a huge splash when she jumps into the water. Later on, Rosemary introduces Hal to her parents, Mr. and Mrs. Shanahan. Hal and Mr. Shanahan talk about work during dinner, and Rosemary's father tells Hal to make a presentation on Monday. However, when Rosemary and Mrs. Shanahan leave to get some coffee, Mr. Shanahan tells Hal to cut out the act. Mr. Shanahan believes Hal is only trying to be kind to Rosemary, and he can't blame him because of how his daughter looks. He also makes fun of Rosemary's weight, upsetting Hal when he realizes Rosemary isn't attractive enough for her father. Unfortunately, Mr. Shanahan can only keep quiet when Hal points out that it's his fault that Rosemary feels insecure about herself. At Hal's apartment, Hal and Rosemary finally sleep together. After that, they begin to grow closer, and Jill can't help but feel confused when she sees Rosemary leaving Hal's place. So, Jill invites Hal to dinner, but the guy refuses. After Hal's presentation at work, everyone applauds him, and Mr. Shanahan calls him to his office. Mr. Shanahan admits that he feels embarrassed for what he said about Rosemary, saying his daughter is lucky to have Hal. But Hal says he's the lucky one, and Mr. Shanahan finally tells him he'll be working directly for him. Later that day, Hal introduces Rosemary to Artie and Jen. Hal's colleagues can't believe he's dating Mr. Shanahan's daughter, and it shocks Artie when Rosemary takes a big slice of his cake. Once Rosemary leaves, Artie and Jen express their disappointment, believing Hal is exploiting the poor girl to secure a position in the company. Eventually, Hal starts working out, and Mauricio can't help but notice how much he's changed. Mauricio is worried that his friend is now into unattractive girls, but Hal has no idea what he's talking about. Mauricio also says Rosemary has no ankles, upsetting Hal and making him think he's scared. Remembering Lindy, Hal starts to believe Mauricio is just inventing reasons to dump girls because he's afraid. Sadly, Mauricio crosses the line when he says Hal wouldn't even be talking to Rosemary if her father wasn't his boss. One day, Hal and Rosemary go on a double date with Walt and his girlfriend, who turns out to be Nurse Peeler. They first stop by a gas station to buy some snacks, where they discover Nurse Peeler is young and beautiful. However, since she's mean, Hal sees her as an old and strict lady. Once they reach the countryside, Hal and the others have fun in an inn. Rosemary is surprised to see Ralph, who is also with his friend Lee Boy. Rosemary then introduces Hal to the guys, saying they're her Peace Corps buddies. Unfortunately, the conversation soon becomes awkward when Hal tells him a joke, and before Ralph leaves, he tells Rosemary that she looks happy. As soon as the guys leave, Rosemary tells Hal that Ralph is her ex-boyfriend. Meanwhile, Mauricio talks to Tony after one of his seminars and asks him about Hal, eventually learning that the TV guru hypnotized his friend. Tony says he altered Hal's perception a bit, but Mauricio just wants to know if there's a word or phrase that'll turn Hal back to normal. Mauricio also says Hal's job is in jeopardy because of Rosemary. Rosemary's actions are making Tony realize that perhaps he made a mistake. While on a date in a restaurant, Rosemary informs Hal that Ralph wants her to join him and Carabas on a mission. This immediately upsets Hal, particularly because he perceives Ralph as handsome and believes he can't match him. Rosemary, on the other hand, assures Hal that she's in love with him, but she doesn't understand why he thinks Ralph is attractive. Then, the booth suddenly breaks, so Hal rushes to help Rosemary before talking to the manager. Hal asks the manager for an extra chair for Rosemary, but the manager tells him to wait a bit as she answers the phone. Hal also gets a call from Mauricio, who tells him the trigger phrase, "Shallow Hal wants a gal." Hal is unsure of Mauricio's motivation for telling him this, and he informs him that he is currently at the Macintosh restaurant with Rosemary. When he ends the call, he becomes confused to discover that the manager has left. Instead, a man posing as a woman approaches him and introduces himself as the manager. Puzzled, Hal begins to return to his seat when he notices a large woman standing in Rosemary's place. He then asks the manager who that lady is, and the manager wonders if he's okay. With no other choice, Hal prepares to confront the woman, not realizing she's Rosemary. But Mauricio suddenly shows up and takes him out of there. Mauricio immediately tells Hal that Tony hypnotized him and explains everything, but Hal doesn't believe him and starts heading back to the restaurant. However, Hal realizes Mauricio is telling the truth when he runs into Katrina and sees her actual appearance. At home, Hal can't help but feel furious that Mauricio ruined his relationship with Rosemary, so Mauricio argues that he only helped Hal see the real Rosemary, but Hal is still upset. Mauricio then suggests asking Tony to hypnotize Hal again, but he tells his friend to avoid Rosemary in the meantime so that he won't see what she looks like. Unfortunately, Rosemary suddenly knocks on the door, leaving Hal with no choice but to come up with an excuse to turn her away. Still, Rosemary refuses to leave, so Mauricio puts petroleum jelly on Hal's eyes to make it look like he has a severe case of conjunctivitis. Of course, that prevents Hal from seeing Rosemary, and the lady eventually leaves after making sure he's okay. After a few days, Mr. Shanahan asks Hal about his relationship with Rosemary, saying his daughter is worried because she's having trouble getting him on the phone. Hal then says he's just busy with work, assuring his boss he'll call Rosemary. Unfortunately, Hal and Mauricio are struggling to track down Tony, which means Hal can't see Rosemary yet. One afternoon, Rosemary calls Hal and tells him things haven't felt the same lately. Hal then asks her not to worry, saying he's just dealing with something, but adding that everything will be okay. At the same time, Hal and Mauricio still can't find Tony, and Hal eventually goes on a date with Jill in a restaurant just to stop her from bugging him. Sadly, Rosemary shows up with her parents for dinner and sees Hal and Jill holding hands. Hurt, Rosemary quickly went to the ladies' room, unable to see Hal turn Jill down. Moments later, Hal bumps into Rosemary but doesn't recognize her, and he proceeds to use the payphone. Hey guys, if you're enjoying this movie so far, please click the like and subscribe buttons to receive all our future movie summaries. Trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. Hal calls Rosemary as she leaves the restaurant, not realizing they just saw each other, so Rosemary ends the call. Then, 5 days later, Mr. Shanahan tells Hal to leave Rosemary alone and informs him she has accepted a Peace Corps assignment. Mr. Shanahan also claims that Ralph is the right guy for Rosemary and they're back together. He wants Hal to respect this decision. Later on, Hal goes to the hospital to talk to Rosemary, but learns from Walt that she left early. Upon seeing Cadence's burnt skin, Hal recognizes his shallowness. He tells the kid he's been having problems with Rosemary, so Cadence advises him to buy a gift for his girlfriend so they can make up. Afterward, Hal meets Mauricio, who admits he's scared of women because of his birth defect. He then shows Hal his vestigial tail, saying no doctor will touch it, but Hal says it's not so bad. Hal also asks Mauricio to give him a ride to the Peace Corps office, where he doesn't recognize Lee's boy. At the same time, Hal finally realizes that Ralph isn't attractive at all when he sees him, but he still congratulates him for getting back together with Rosemary. Ralph, however, refutes this and asserts that he has not received an invitation to Rosemary's farewell party. Wasting no time, Hal heads to Rosemary's house with Ralph, Mauricio, and Lee, and he immediately goes inside and kisses a woman he believes is his girlfriend. Then, Mrs. Shanahan, who looks exactly like Rosemary, sees them and wonders why Hal is kissing their housekeeper. Moments later, Hal apologizes to Rosemary in front of everyone, but she only gets upset and tries to send him away. Still, Hal expresses how much he loves Rosemary and says he wants to spend the rest of his life making it up to her. Unfortunately, Rosemary says she's leaving for Caribus that night, so Hal decides to go with her. Mauricio also informs Rosemary that Lee Boy swore Hal into the car before going there, and although she's upset, she can't help but kiss her boyfriend. After that, Hal tries to carry Rosemary, but she's too heavy for him, so Rosemary carries him to the car instead, and they finally drive away. Meanwhile, Mauricio meets a woman who likes dogs and asks her to have a drink with him. He wags his tail as they walk together. So, how was the movie? I hope you guys like it. Who was your favorite character from this movie? Let us know in the comments section. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button.